I'm now joined by the Deputy to the UN Ambassador, State Department spokesperson, Senior Advisor to the Secretary of State under President Biden, National Security Council spokesperson and Senior Director for Strategic Comms under President Obama, Senior Analyst and Spokesman at the CIA, Ned Price. Ned, I think your national security bona fides are pretty well established here. So I want to jump right in with regard to this group chat scandal that's emerged under the Trump administration here. How dangerous are the effects of what we're seeing right now, and how much more that we don't know could be percolating under the surface given the recklessness with which this administration operates?
You know, Brian, you're thinking about it in the right terms, precisely the right terms, what we know and what we don't know. Let's first start with what we know, and what we know is pretty staggering. Just to put this in context, as we understand it, as told by Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, this was a discussion, a session convening of the Principals Committee. And the Principals Committee is, just as it sounds, the principal from every relevant department and agency across our national security apparatus, meaning the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, CIA Director, on down, where the most complex, consequential, controversial, and yes, sensitive issues are discussed, adjudicated, and ultimately decided. Now, in every administration in which I've worked, in every administration over the past 60 plus years, those discussions have taken place in one place, and that's the White House Situation Room for very good reason, because these are held at a top secret level. If people aren't able to be there in person, let's say the Secretary of State is traveling around the world, perfectly understandable and in fact encouraged. That person has a team that goes ahead and they set up a top secret tent in the Secretary's hotel room, and the Secretary can beam in into the Situation Room on that top secret basis. The fact that this group thought that Signal, a commercial application, was an appropriate substitute, it's really just staggering. There is no other way to describe it. Signal and its brethren have been the subject of nation states that have attempted to hack them, and in some cases have hacked them, but also private sector entities that have similar capabilities. And when you think about this collection of people, the Vice President of the United States, the CIA Director, the Secretary of State, there is no more valuable set of intelligence targets than the individuals who were in this single Signal chat room. So you can imagine if an intelligence service stumbled upon this chat room, they would consider it to be a gold mine. But you also raise what we don't know. And that is, to me, what is just as worrisome. Was this the tip of the iceberg? Were there multiple Signal PCs convened? Was there a Signal chat on Iran, on Russia, on China? Where did this start and where does it end? You know, the irony of this, Brian, is that Jeffrey Goldberg, the reporter who was inadvertently added to this chain, probably did more than all of these supposed custodians of our national security combined to protect our national security by reporting on this. If this gets them to stop this practice, that is to our collective, to our national benefit.
Ned, quick question specifically. You know, there was a member of this group chat that was actually in Russia at the time that the thread was happening. Is there a way in which, depending on where he was, that his communications could have been intercepted if he joined a certain Wi-Fi network, for example, while he was discussing with these other principals on the group chat?
The answer is almost certainly yes. The fact that Steve Witkoff, the special envoy for the Middle East, was not only in Russia, but in Moscow at the Kremlin, meeting with President Putin around the same time this chat was taking place, means that the Russians, who have one of the most sophisticated intelligence services and technical capabilities around the world, almost certainly had access to his electronic communications. They may have gained physical access to his phone. At the very least, I have the utmost confidence that he was the target of technical surveillance. That is to say, using the technology they have to go after the contents of his phone. So given what we know of the Russians and their tradecraft and their sophisticated capabilities, I think it is highly likely, if not almost certain, that the Russians saw this before the rest of the world did when Jeffrey Goldberg reported it.
Is there any worry that the reason that the Trump administration is opting to use these unsecured chat apps where they obviously have features where what they were saying can be disappeared after a certain amount of time. I mean, I use Signal, and there are ways in which you can make it disappear after an hour, a day, a week. That they're doing it to purposefully subvert requirements that the government be transparent about what it is they're actually doing.
I think it is quite possible that they're using this to skirt something known as the Presidential Records Act. And that legislation mandates that this type of record, communication of a policy deliberation among senior principals in the government, be maintained for a certain number of years. But as we think about this, I'm actually less concerned with the details of the Presidential Records Act and the safekeeping of official government documents than I am with the national security implications of this.
Yeah.
It's terrible that they're seem to be violating the Presidential Records Act. But that really pales in comparison to the use of this technology to discuss information that almost certainly is classified at the top secret level. One is against the law and shouldn't be done. The other is against the law, shouldn't be done, and can put our national security at risk, and almost certainly has.
During the congressional hearing, we heard the excuse be trotted out that this is all justifiable because as far as the principals were concerned, or as far as they were letting on, the information that they were discussing wasn't classified. So first of all, do you buy this excuse that the information that they were discussing wasn't classified? And what do you make of this excuse that all of this is justifiable in the event that it wasn't classified?
Brian, I think there are really two possibilities here, neither of them good. One is that they're lying. And I think that is probably most likely. They are lying. They knew this was classified, and they're trying to cover it up at this very moment. When you talk about pending military operations, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTP as they're called, that is by definition classified information. So it is hard to imagine that the substance that they were communicating was not classified at the time. Now, the other possibility, and this is what they may be resting their case on, is a distortion of the most technicality there is. In that a senior U.S. government official, whether it's the president, vice president, in some cases the Secretary of Defense or CIA director, can retroactively declassify information. And so it may well be that they are saying now, after the fact that they know Jeffrey Goldberg was in there, we're going to go ahead and declassify this. They sort of waved their magic classification wand, declassified it. And so they're telling the American public, this is not classified. What they're not saying is that it should have been classified, and they're only declassifying it, if that's in fact what they are doing, to save their own skin.
Right. Can you speak to the excuse that they've been putting forward that there was no negative outcome, and so kind of the ends justify the means because they were able to accomplish the mission they sought out to accomplish? Everything that happened in the lead up to that outcome is permissible, fine, justifiable, because really they got what they wanted in the end.
Yeah, Brian, this goes back to the question of what we don't know. They are right. This operation went off. Seemingly, it had the effects that the Trump administration intended. But what,
with the exception of inviting the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic into the war room, so to speak.
That small asterisk, yes.
Yeah.
But the question is, what have the Russians learned from this group chat? What have the Chinese learned from this group chat? What have the Iranians learned from this group chat? Both about our capabilities, what we can do, the intelligence we have, but also importantly, the intelligence we don't have, what we call intelligence gaps. That can be really, really valuable information to our adversaries, what we aren't able to get our hands on, which can help in turn inform them as to how to protect their secrets, whether they're military secrets or intelligence secrets. But the other, element of this, Brian, is, again, was this the only signal chat? Was there a China signal chat? Was there a Russia signal chat? Was there an Iran signal chat? What has this group of individuals who displayed rank incompetence, not to mention laziness, and if you go back to the way in which so many of them stake their career, hypocrisy in terms of the way they're handling classified information, what have they divulged on other scores, whether it's communicating through Signal, whether it's speaking through open phone lines, whether it's by having loose lips with those around them. To me, that is almost as frightening as what we've learned, what we know from this episode.
Ned, what are the general or usual consequences for this type of recklessness with national security information?
Well, as you know, there's really no analog to this. There's not a similar case in which we know of a principals committee discussion being held on Signal, and for very good reason, because previous administrations, protected our national security and
Yeah.
not be boneheaded enough to do this. But if, let's say, these were two low-level intelligence officials or military officials or a group of lower-level officials who were discovered, they would almost certainly be disciplined. I think there's a very good chance they would lose their job. They would almost certainly lose their access to classified information. There is an analogous case that is, while it does have some similarities, is obviously very different. And that was the case of Hillary Clinton's unclassified email server. But in that case, and one of the reasons why it's so different is that Secretary Clinton and her aides knew that this was an unclassified server. So they went out of their way to just keep their conversations on an unclassified basis. The only reason we have those records is because the State Department turned them over because they went through the natural and correct protocols. But remember what happened in that case. The Department of Justice, that was then in the hands of an appointee of President Obama, initiated an investigation. Whether that was right or wrong, I will leave others to decide. But the Department of Justice at least looked into the matter and ultimately concluded there was no basis for criminal charges. I would be shocked if Pam Bondi, Donald Trump's new attorney general, or Kash Patel, his new director of FBI, launched any sort of investigation into this, criminal or otherwise. I would be similarly shocked if the Republican leadership of the Congressional Intelligence Committees or the Foreign Relations Committees or the Armed Services Committees or the Oversight Committees launched their own hearings and investigations into this. This is not a level playing field. People like Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz and all these other people spent the past 10 years crowing about operational security and pointing to Secretary Clinton. The fact that they are now in the midst of this, to say it's ironic is an understatement. To say it's sad and pathetic, I think, is closer to the way I feel.
And that's the part I want to dig into a little bit here to finish off. We have spent the better part of a decade listening to how Hillary Clinton's purported recklessness with national security information that, by the way, a House committee led by Republicans found no wrongdoing of, that was the gravest threat that we'd ever faced, that it put all of our lives at imminent risk. And yet now you have the White House running away from this, doing apologia, claiming that all of this wasn't classified, so it's fine, claiming that nothing went wrong. You have Pete Hegseth himself trying to claim that all of this is just a hoax. He came out and said that Jeffrey Goldberg was just discredited, and so he's trying to undermine the whole thing, despite the fact that the White House had already come out and verified its legitimacy. And so what do you make of the fact that all of these people predicated so much of their identities on this idea that national security information has to be carefully guarded, that anybody who acts in a way that's reckless with that information should be up for immediate discipline, if not criminal prosecution themselves? Those people are now either conspicuously silent, lying about it, or trying to justify it when it happens to a Republican.
Brian, to me, it suggests a couple things. One, so many of these individuals who are now at the apex of our national security bureaucracy are just unserious individuals. They never had the best interests of our national security in mind as they were pursuing Secretary Clinton and other related matters. They were trying to score cheap political points. And I think the rank hypocrisy that we're seeing now is really telling of that. The fact that so many of the statements that we've heard from these individuals over the years could be transplanted onto this case and fit neatly and nicely. Really, I think Secretary Clinton put it best in a tweet of hers that I saw. I think she said something like, "You have got to be kidding me." And I can only imagine what she is thinking as she sees the very people that went after her for something that doesn't even compare to what we are seeing of this administration. So much of what I've heard from this universe over the past 10 years, it's just not on the level. It was political. It was not about national security. It was about burnishing their own credentials. And ultimately, I think this episode goes to show the one to suffer is our own national reputation and probably even our own national security in the end.
Ned Price, thank you so much for all of the time and the knowledge. I appreciate it, and I'm sure this won't be the last time we speak.
Thanks a lot, Brian. I appreciate it.